The wind howled across the barren wastelands, carrying with it the bitter scent of decay and desperation. Earth, once vibrant and full of life, had become a ghost of its former self. Cities were reduced to ruins, and the skies, once bright with the light of progress, were now permanently shrouded in a thick layer of ash and smoke. The zenith, an unstoppable alien force, had swept through the solar system with terrifying speed, annihilating everything in their path. Entire fleets had been obliterated, and now Earth was all that remained, a fractured, broken world clinging to survival. In the deepest recesses of Earth's final stronghold, beneath the cracked surface of the devastated continent, the Vanguard Coalition was humanity's last hope. The underground base buzzed with the low hum of machinery as scientists, engineers, and military leaders worked tirelessly on a plan that seemed impossible: the resurrection of Captain Elias Kale, the war hero who had fallen in battle over a century ago. Kale had been the face of humanity's resistance during the Great War, a time when Earth's people fought tooth and nail to stave off the Zenith invasion. His exploits were legendary, a symbol of hope in the darkest of times. But no one had ever expected to see him again. His body was long gone, his death a somber moment in the final days of Earth's defenses. Now, with no other choice, humanity's last scientists had extracted Cal's preserved DNA from a hidden vault. Geneticists, using the most advanced cloning and neural reactivation technology, had recreated him, not in the image of a man, but as a weapon, engineered to withstand the horrors of this new world. Yet as they waited for the final procedure, a quiet tension gripped the team. They were not sure if they were resurrecting a man or unleashing a monster. At the center of the lab, a tall, pristine cryo chamber flickered to life. Inside, the form of Captain Kale lay suspended, his features still sharp and full of determination, frozen in time. His body was now more than human, augmented, enhanced, a soldier forged in the crucible of war. The scientists, though nervous, had prepared for this moment their entire lives, and yet there was no telling what kind of man, if a man at all, would emerge from this sterile artificial rebirth. Commander Lyra Voss stood at the control panel, her eyes fixed on the frozen figure before her. She had read every word ever written about Kale, revered him as a hero, and yet here she stood, about to face the reality of the man who had become nothing more than a myth. Lyra was a born leader, but she knew this was a gamble. The fate of humanity rested on the shoulders of a man who had died long ago. "We're ready," a voice came from behind her. Dr. Elleron, the lead scientist on the project. His tone was measured, professional, but Lyra could hear the uncertainty underneath. Lyra nodded. "Activate the process. Now." A series of commands echoed through the control room, and the chamber doors slowly slid open. A soft, eerie hum filled the air as Cal's body began to stir. His chest rose and fell, a steady rhythm, as though he had been sleeping for only a few moments. The holographic displays above flickered with data, monitoring his vital signs. Then his eyes opened. For a moment, Lyra's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the eyes of the man she had read about, the fearless, unyielding captain who led humanity's greatest battles. No, these eyes were different, confused, disoriented, as if they had just woken from a nightmare. Kale blinked, his gaze locking onto Lyra's. A flicker of recognition, then a sharp, piercing question. "Where am I?" Lyra swallowed hard, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "You're home, Captain Kale. Welcome back." Cal's gaze swept across the sterile, dimly lit room, confusion clouding his sharp features. The strange new world around him was nothing like the one he had once known. The cold metal walls, the hum of advanced technology, the constant whirring of machines, it was all too alien, too far removed from the bustling cities and battlefields he had fought on so many years ago. His body, unnaturally enhanced, felt both foreign and familiar at the same time, as if it was his own yet not entirely so. "Where am I?" He repeated, his voice hoarse, strained. What happened to Earth? Lyra Voss stepped forward, her boots clacking sharply against the floor. She studied the man before her, unsure if she was looking at the savior of humanity or a ghost of its past. His frame was still imposing, his jawline sharp, but his eyes, they were distant, confused. Not the eyes of the legendary captain, but a man thrown into a world he did not understand. You were brought back, Lyra said, her voice steady but laced with something unspoken. Humanity's last hope. The Hero Project. We've been fighting a war with the Zenith for over a century. We? Zenith. Kale interrupted, his brow furrowing. What do you mean? The Zenith we were still pushing them back. Earth. Earth's fallen, Lyra said, her words cutting through the fog in Cal's mind. She forced herself to remain calm, to convey the urgency of their situation. The Zenith conquered most of the solar system. The Earth you knew is gone. What you're seeing now is the last of us, hiding underground. We've lost everything. But your return is our last hope. The Hero Project was our final chance. Cal's gaze shifted to the monitors around him. Images of a ravaged Earth, cities in ruins, skies blackened with smoke, flashed across the screens. He inhaled sharply, the weight of her words crashing into him like a physical blow. It was impossible. This wasn't the world he had left behind. The dream of a free Earth, a future for humanity, had been crushed beneath the boots of the Zenith. He closed his eyes, trying to clear the fog clouding his mind. His body felt stronger, faster, more alive than he had ever remembered. But his memories, his purpose, were a jumbled mess. He had been a soldier, a leader, but who was he now? You've been dead for over a century, Lyra continued, her voice softer now, almost compassionate. We brought you back, Captain. We need you. We need the hero we've only ever known from history. Cal's gaze hardened as he slowly stood from the table. His legs were steady beneath him, but his mind was in turmoil. The world had changed, and he was no longer sure of his place in it. But there was something about Lyra's words, something about the desperation in her eyes, that stirred a buried fire in his chest. I don't know who I am anymore, Cal said, his voice low but unwavering. But if you think I'm going to sit idly by while my people burn, then you've mistaken me for someone else. Lyra nodded, her expression hardening. We've already made our first move. There's an enclave of survivors, but they won't last long. The Zenith are pushing forward. We need to strike now, before they bring their full force to Earth. Cal looked at her, his mind racing with the implications of her words. Earth was a dying world, and the Zenith were merciless in their conquest. Humanity had been pushed to the edge of annihilation. And now, here he was, an ancient soldier thrust back into a battle he hadn't chosen, but one he knew all too well. Tell me what to do, Cal said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that still lingered in his bones, even if the world around him had changed. Lyra's lips curled into a grim smile. We need to win this war, and we need a leader. You are that leader, Cal. You're humanity's last hope. So, let's get to work. The silence that followed was charged with the gravity of the moment. For the first time since his awakening, Cal felt something stir deep inside him. It wasn't clarity, but something close to it, a resolve, a flicker of the man he had once been. No matter what the world had become, he was not going to let it burn. Not again. With a final, steadying breath, Cal nodded. The battle for humanity's survival had begun. The underground base buzzed with the frantic energy of a last-ditch operation. The Vanguard's remaining forces, a ragtag group of soldiers, engineers, and scientists, were preparing for their most dangerous mission yet. An assault on the Zenith Fortress, where the last known human enclave was held captive. The Zenith, with their cold, unfeeling superiority, had made the enclave into a symbol of their dominance, a final nail in humanity's coffin. If the humans couldn't reclaim it, the Zenith would tighten their grip on Earth, cutting off the last real hope for resistance. Kale stood before the assembled soldiers, watching them, not with the detached air of a distant leader, but with the intensity of a man who knew the cost of failure. His heart beat steadily, his enhanced senses sharp. Every movement of the soldiers around him, every whispered command, felt like an assault on his senses, but he remained calm. The mission had to succeed, or Earth would fall into permanent darkness. "You all know why we're here," Kel's voice rang out, steady and authoritative, cutting through the murmur of preparation. He had spent the last few hours getting to know his team, learning their strengths, weaknesses, and fears. He knew that leadership wasn't just about tactics, it was about trust, about giving those who followed him the strength to survive. But there was no room for hesitation. Not today. We're not just fighting to survive. We're fighting to prove that humanity's will to live is stronger than the Zenith's desire to conquer. We take back that enclave. We show them that Earth isn't just a prize to be claimed. It's a world that will never kneel. His words hung in the air, and Kel could feel the spark of belief that flickered in the soldiers' eyes. They weren't just listening to a man. They were hearing a legend, a living testament to humanity's unyielding spirit. Kale turned to Lyra, who stood at his side, her face as steely and focused as ever. She had become more than just his commander. She had become his anchor in this new world, a voice of reason when his instincts threatened to overtake him. They shared a silent understanding, a bond forged in the fire of necessity. She was his constant in this chaos, and he wouldn't let her down. "We move out in 15, Lyra said, her voice sharp as she ran over the final preparations. "We got a small window before the Zenith realize we've mobilized. Once we're inside, we move fast. Get in, extract the survivors, and get out before the reinforcements arrive." Kale nodded, locking eyes with her. "Don't worry. We'll be gone before they know we were here." The plan was simple. A covert strike aimed at reclaiming the enclave, a critical asset for Earth's survival. The enemy was everywhere, their forces overwhelming, but they didn't know the full extent of the Vanguard's resolve. This mission wasn't about fighting fair. It was about getting in, extracting the survivors, and crippling the Zenith's ability to track them. As the team boarded the assault shuttle, Kale felt a tightness in his chest. The mission was reckless, dangerous, and likely suicidal. But that was the nature of war. Desperate measures had become the rule, not the exception. And Kale was no stranger to facing impossible odds. The shuttle rocketed through the Earth's atmosphere, heading toward the Zenith stronghold. The world outside the viewport was a chaotic mix of fiery streaks as the remnants of human forces clashed with the invaders. The ship jolted slightly, and Kale felt the familiar rush of adrenaline course through him. It had been so long since he had felt this, alive in the chaos of battle. He looked to Lyra one last time before the drop. "Ready?" she asked, her voice tight with the pressure of the moment. Kale gave a single, decisive nod. "Let's remind them who we are." The shuttle shuddered again, and with a roar, it plunged into the enemy's territory. The battle for humanity's future had truly begun. The assault was chaos from the moment they hit the ground. The shuttle's landing ramp slammed open, and a blistering hail of gunfire greeted the Vanguard team. The ground trembled beneath them as explosions erupted in the distance. Kale was out of the shuttle before it even fully hit the dirt, his enhanced reflexes propelling him into action. The roar of plasma bolts and kinetic rounds filled the air as the team scrambled for cover, weapons blazing. Kal's mind raced as he calculated every move, every shot. The Zenith forces, large and ruthless, had already been alerted to their presence. They were prepared. He had no doubt of that. But Kal had something they didn't: the raw tenacity of humanity's last defenders. The goal was clear: reach the enclave, extract the survivors, and cripple the Zenith's military infrastructure. They didn't have time for anything else. "Push forward," Kal shouted, his voice commanding as he led the charge. His soldiers followed, a wave of humanity against an unyielding alien tide. The team cut through the enemy's defenses with brutal efficiency. Kale moved like a force of nature, each step an unstoppable momentum. He could feel his body thrumming with unnatural strength, his enhanced muscles firing with lethal precision as he tore through the ranks of Zenith soldiers. His vision sharpened, every movement clear in his mind, as he calculated his next strike before the first one even landed. But despite their speed and precision, the Zenith were relentless. They adapted quickly, using cloaking technology to ambush the vanguard at every turn. The air was thick with the smell of scorched metal and burning ozone as the soldiers fought tooth and nail to advance. Lyra's voice came over the comms. "We're losing ground. There are too many of them." Kale gritted his teeth. Losing ground wasn't an option, not now. "We keep moving," he barked, but as he spoke, a sudden blast from a hidden Zenith turret slammed into the ground near him. The shockwave sent Kale sprawling, his vision spinning as the world around him erupted in chaos. His heart raced, but he quickly rolled to his feet, fighting to stay conscious. His enhanced body took the brunt of the blow, but even so, the force was enough to rattle him. "Kale." Lyra's voice came through urgently. He shook his head, clearing the fog in his mind, and forced himself upright. "I'm fine," he grunted, his voice grim. "Keep pushing. We're almost there." His words were more for himself than for the team. They were close to the enclave, just a few more miles, a few more minutes, but Kale knew they weren't going to make it that easily. The Zenith were on the brink of turning the tide, and he could already hear the thundering engines of their reinforcements in the distance. The assault was becoming a desperate race against time. Kale's enhanced body was starting to feel the strain of the battle. His muscles burned, his bones ached, and the damage from earlier was taking its toll. He could feel his heart pounding against his chest, a constant reminder that even though he had been resurrected, he was still only human, or at least what was left of it. As the team reached the entrance to the enclave, they encountered the full force of the Zenith's defensive perimeter. A wall of energy shields and automated turrets stood in their way, an almost impenetrable defense. Kale assessed the situation quickly. They were running out of time, and the enemy would soon overwhelm them. "Lyra, I need a distraction," Kale ordered, his voice low and urgent. She didn't hesitate. On it, in a blur of motion, Lyra and the rest of the team moved to flank the enemy positions. The air was thick with fire, plasma, and the harsh sounds of battle. Kale made his move, running full force toward the energy shields. He could feel the heat radiating from the barrier as he leaped, twisting his body to avoid the incoming fire. With a mighty roar, he slammed his fist into the energy shield, his enhanced strength breaking through the barrier's first layer. But the cost was immediate. His body, already worn from the earlier explosions, shuddered under the strain. The pain was searing as his arm gave way beneath the immense force, and the world went black for a brief moment. He dropped to his knees, gasping for air, but the momentary lapse in consciousness passed quickly. His mind sharpened again, the instinct to protect his people pushing him forward. Kale forced himself back to his feet, the pain burning through his enhanced body. "No time," he muttered to himself, his resolve hardening. With a final burst of strength, he tore through the remaining layers of the shield, sending sparks flying into the air as the energy field collapsed. The team surged forward, but Kale knew this victory would come at a cost. His body was breaking down, and the toll of his resurrection was beginning to catch up with him. But there was no going back now. He'd defied death before. Now he would do it again. "Move," Kale barked as his team charged into the enclave, ready for what came next. And then, just as they breached the inner perimeter, Kale felt his heart race uncontrollably. His body screamed for rest, but he ignored it. The battle was far from over, and they were going to need everything he had left. The war was taking its toll on him, but Kale was determined to see it through. The Zenith wouldn't win, not while he was still breathing. The enclave's walls were thick, its interior eerily quiet in contrast to the chaos of the outside world. As Kale and the Vanguard team swept through the reinforced corridors, the only sound was the pounding of their boots against the cold metal floor and the distant hum of emergency generators struggling to keep the lights on. The survivors were here, somewhere, huddled in the shadows, trying to outlast the relentless assault from the zenith. Cal's mind raced. The plan had been simple: reach the enclave, extract the survivors, and cripple the zenith's infrastructure. But now that they were inside, everything felt more fragile. The zenith's grip on Earth was tightening, and with every minute, more of their reinforcements would be coming, faster than they could anticipate. They had no time to waste. "We need to get to the command center," Lyra said, her voice firm as she signaled to the team to move forward. "That's where they're holding the survivors, and it's our best shot at stopping the zenith from launching a counterattack." Kale nodded. The deeper they went into the base, the more the walls seemed to close in around them. The air felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. The team moved in formation, their weapons drawn, scanning every corner, every shadow. It wasn't just the zenith they had to worry about. The deeper they ventured, the more it felt like something else was lurking, something more sinister. "Stay sharp," Kale said, his voice low, his senses tingling with the quiet, almost palpable sense of danger. His mind was still racing, but a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The corridors twisted and turned like a maze, every turn revealing more debris, overturned crates, and abandoned equipment. The base had been hastily evacuated. Some of the survivors must have escaped, but there were still too many missing. Kel's enhanced vision scanned the walls for signs of movement, his body tense with every step. A sudden flicker of light broke the silence. A crackling electrical panel sparked on the wall, sending a brief flash of light across the room. In that instant, Kel saw movement, too quick to catch, disappearing into the shadows. His breath caught in his throat. "Did you see that?" he muttered to Lyra, his voice low but urgent. She nodded. Her expression hardened. "Something's not right." "Keep moving," Kale commanded. They couldn't afford to get distracted. The survivors were close. The command center was just up ahead, but every instinct in him screamed that they weren't alone. As they approached the door to the command center, Kale signaled for the team to halt. He moved ahead, stepping lightly on the balls of his feet, his enhanced senses honing in on every sound, every whisper in the air. The door was locked, but it was a simple barrier. Kale didn't hesitate. He slashed through the panel with a single, swift strike from his enhanced arm. The door opened with a hiss, revealing the command center beyond. Dark, deserted, and ominously quiet. There were no guards, no soldiers, no zenith in sight. But there were signs of struggle. The walls were scared, the monitors shattered, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke. "Search the room," Kale ordered, his voice clipped as he scanned the room, his heightened senses flaring as he searched for any hint of life. The team spread out, checking every corner, every alcove. It was then that Cal's gaze fell upon something strange. A series of markings on the floor, leading toward a hidden hatch beneath one of the desks. His pulse quickened as he moved toward it, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Something wasn't right. These markings, scratches, claw marks, looked far too deliberate. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was something else entirely. "Lyra," Kale called, his voice laced with urgency. "Check this out." Lyra joined him, kneeling by the hatch. She examined it for a moment before looking up at him, her eyes dark with concern. "These aren't human," she said quietly, her fingers tracing the scratches. "What the hell is going on here?" Before Cal could respond, there was a low growl, a sound so deep it reverberated through the walls. The air seemed to thicken as a figure emerged from the shadows, its movements fluid, unnatural. It was humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, its skin a sickly, grayish hue, and its eyes gleamed with a cruel intelligence. The creature moved with eerie precision, and its lips parted in a twisted, predatory smile. It was a zenith, but not the same kind Cal had fought before. This one was different. Something worse. "Get ready," Cale shouted, his heart pounding, adrenaline flooding his veins. The team raised their weapons, but Cale knew this was no ordinary fight. This was the Zenith's ultimate weapon, a hunter bred for the sole purpose of extermination. The creature lunged with terrifying speed, and Cale was ready. His body surged into motion, meeting the monster head-on. But he could feel it. The difference in power. This thing was stronger than anything he'd ever faced. The battle had just taken a terrifying turn, and Cale was about to find out just how far humanity's resilience could go when faced with true darkness. The creature's grotesque form slithered toward Cale with terrifying speed, its elongated limbs reaching out like claws ready to rend flesh from bone. The air thickened with its predatory presence, and Cale's mind clicked into overdrive. He could feel the surge of adrenaline, the sharp clarity of battle taking over as he anticipated its next move. With a roar, the creature lunged, its massive claws aiming for his throat. Cale sidestepped at the last moment, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to evade the strike by mere inches. The floor beneath him cracked as the creature's claws sank deep into the steel, leaving jagged gashes in the metal. Cale's breath came in shallow bursts. This was no ordinary opponent. It moved with precision, its strikes calculated and relentless. This wasn't just a monster, it was a hunter. Fire. Fire now. Cale barked as his team opened fire on the creature. The barrage of plasma shots and kinetic rounds rained down on the beast, but it hardly seemed fazed. Its skin shimmered with an otherworldly resilience, deflecting the worst of the assault. It was as if their weapons were no more than irritants to it. Cale's eyes locked onto the creature's glowing red gaze. It wasn't just hunting them, it was testing them, studying their movements, as if it could predict their every action. His pulse quickened as the creature turned toward one of his soldiers, a young woman with bright, hopeful eyes who had joined the Vanguard's mission. Her rifle was still trained on the beast, but her hands were trembling. "No," Cale yelled. Before he could reach her, the creature was upon her, its long claws grabbing hold of her arm. The soldier screamed as her body was lifted off the ground, but Cale's mind reacted before his body did. He threw himself into the fray, his enhanced speed blurring his figure as he slammed into the creature, knocking it off balance. The soldier fell to the ground, her body crumpling with a sickening thud, but she was alive. "Get her out of here," Cale shouted, his voice low with urgency. Lyra, without hesitation, moved to help the fallen soldier, dragging her back toward the entrance to the command center. Cale's eyes didn't leave the creature. It was undeterred by the attack, its glowing eyes locking onto him with newfound focus. The beast let out a shrill screech, and the sound cut through Cale's bones. It was no longer just attacking, it was hunting him, specifically. And that meant one thing. Cale was its target. The creature's movements were impossibly fast, its agility a terrifying contrast to its massive, brutish size. It moved in on Cale again, its claws flashing through the air like deadly blades. Cale barely managed to dodge, the air snapping around him as the creature's claws scraped past his armor. The force of the attack sent Cale skidding across the floor, slamming into a control panel, and sparks flew as it shorted out under the impact. Cale groaned, his body aching from the force of the blow, but his mind was still razor-sharp. He couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. The creature was relentless. It was faster than anything Cale had encountered, and its resilience was beyond anything human-made weapons could handle. He gritted his teeth, staring down the beast as it prepared to strike again. It was not just its physical power that made it dangerous. It was its intelligence. The way it analyzed, adapted, and executed its attacks in such a precise manner meant it wasn't just a mindless creature. It was a tool, and a deadly one at that. Cale's mind raced. He needed to find its weakness. No creature, no matter how advanced, was invincible. The key to victory lay in exploiting its vulnerabilities. "Lyra, keep the others back," Kale shouted. "This thing's smarter than it looks." Lyra's voice crackled through the comms. "Understood. Just don't get yourself killed, Kale." Kale's eyes flicked to the walls of the command center, searching for anything that might help him. There, beneath the scattered debris, he saw a broken piece of technology. A discarded energy generator, one that had been used to power the facility's defenses. It was risky, but it might be the only way to even the odds. The creature lunged at him again, but this time Kale was ready. As it barreled toward him, Kale rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its strike. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the energy generator and hurled it at the creature, targeting its weak point, the joints at the base of its skull. The generator crashed into the beast's neck with a satisfying thud, sending a violent surge of energy through the creature's body. It recoiled, screeching in pain as sparks flew from its body, and for the first time, Kale saw it falter. The creature stumbled, disoriented by the blast, its red eyes flickering as its systems overloaded. Kale's opportunity had arrived. With a roar, he charged forward, launching himself at the creature's side. His enhanced strength fueled every strike as he hammered into its vulnerable spots, targeting the joints in its arms and legs. The creature struggled, but its movements were slowing. It was weakening. Kale didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. With one final powerful blow, Kale slammed his fist into the creature's chest, sending it crashing to the ground. The sound of its last breath filled the room, and the creature lay motionless, its glowing eyes dimming as it succumbed to the assault. Kale stood over the fallen monster, breathing heavily. He had won, for now, but the victory came at a cost. The battle was far from over, and the Zenith's true weapon had just shown itself. "Lyra," Kale said, his voice a low rasp, "get the survivors to safety. We've got bigger problems ahead." As his team moved to evacuate the injured, Kale's mind raced ahead. This hunter was only the beginning. The Zenith had more of them, and they were far more dangerous than anyone had realized, and the war was far from over. The command center was silent once more, save for the low hum of the emergency generators, the flicker of damaged lights casting long shadows across the debris-filled room. The creature, the Zenith hunter, lay still at Kal's feet, its once menacing form now reduced to a broken shell. But Kal couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was hollow. The creature had been the Zenith's answer to humanity's last stand. If this was what they had left, then Earth's resistance was in far greater danger than they had imagined. "Is everyone accounted for?" Kale asked, his voice strained but steady, his eyes scanning the room. Lyra nodded as she checked on the injured soldier who had been caught by the beast earlier. "For now, but we need to move, Kale. The longer we stay here, the more likely the Zenith will send reinforcements." He grimaced, the weight of the decision settling heavily in his chest. The team had been through so much already, and yet they had barely scratched the surface of what the Zenith were capable of. Their assault on Earth wasn't just about conquest, it was about eradicating any hope of humanity's survival. "We need to extract the survivors," Kale said, his tone resolute. "And then we hit the Zenith where it hurts. We're not leaving this planet without a fight." Lyra didn't argue. She simply nodded and began organizing the survivors into groups, ensuring they moved swiftly and quietly through the base. Kale followed closely behind, his mind still racing. His enhanced body had already started to feel the strain of battle, the toll of constant resurrection, and near-death experiences weighing on him. But there was no time for rest. The war wouldn't wait. As they made their way through the corridors, Kale couldn't shake the unsettling thought that their battle wasn't just against the Zenith's soldiers. The true threat was something much more insidious. These creatures, these hunters, were just the beginning. Kale had witnessed the horrific potential of their enemies firsthand. But what drove them? What twisted intelligence was behind the Zenith's relentless pursuit of Earth's destruction? The team reached the evacuation zone, where a few remaining survivors had huddled, their faces pale with fear and exhaustion. They looked up as Kale and the Vanguard team entered, their eyes filled with a mix of hope and disbelief. For a moment, Kale's mind flashed back to the time before the war, before humanity had been pushed to the brink of extinction. Back then, these survivors would have been living in a world of opportunity and peace. Now, they were fighting for every breath. "Get them out of here," Kale ordered. He turned to Lyra, his gaze sharp. "We'll cover you." Lyra nodded, already organizing the survivors into the safest route. The Vanguard soldiers formed a protective perimeter around them, weapons raised and ready. Kale's eyes swept over the group, his thoughts shifting back to the larger battle. They could win this small victory, but the real war was still unfolding, and the Zenith were far from finished. Kale's comms buzzed. It was Marcus, the team's strategist. "Kale, we've intercepted Zenith communications. They're planning something big. We need to strike fast." Kale's heart skipped a beat. "What are they planning?" "Not sure yet," Marcus replied. "But it's bad. We think it's some kind of weapon. Something they're activating right now." Kale's pulse quickened. A weapon. The Zenith had already unleashed their most horrifying creature upon them. What else could they possibly have left? "We can't afford to wait," Kale said, a sense of urgency creeping into his voice. "Tell me where they're deploying it. Coordinates coming through now. You've got about 30 minutes before they launch. We'll try to buy you more time, but you have to move now." Kale didn't hesitate. The situation was dire, but they had no choice. They had to destroy the weapon before it could be activated. The lives of every survivor on Earth, every soldier in his unit, depended on this next move. "Everyone, move out," Kale shouted, his voice commanding. The Vanguard soldiers rallied, swiftly taking their positions as they began their march toward the Zenith's weapon. The corridors grew darker as they advanced deeper into the heart of the base. The farther they went, the more the feeling of being watched intensified. Cal's enhanced senses were on high alert, but he could feel something, an unsettling pressure, like they were walking into a trap. He glanced at his team, his eyes meeting Lyra's for a brief moment. She didn't need to say anything. They were all thinking the same thing. The Zenith knew they were coming. As they reached the final junction, the faintest sound echoed through the air, a hum of machinery, something far more ominous than anything they had encountered. The weapon was close. Cal's heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline pushing him forward as they prepared to face the true weapon of the Zenith. If they failed, Earth would fall, and humanity's final stand would be in vain. "Get ready," Kale said, his voice low. "This is it. Whatever happens, we finish it here." And with that, they entered the heart of the Zenith's lair, knowing that the fate of humanity now rested in their hands. The heart of the Zenith's lair was a sprawling, cavernous chamber. Its walls pulsed with eerie blue light, casting long shadows across the vast expanse. The air was thick with the hum of alien machinery, the low vibrations reverberating through Cal's bones. This was it, the heart of the Zenith's weapon. "Stay sharp," Kale muttered to his team, his voice barely above a whisper as they advanced into the chamber, weapons drawn, senses heightened. Every step felt heavier, like the weight of the entire war pressed down on their shoulders. They had fought through so much to get here, but they were entering the final stretch. The fate of humanity was hanging by a thread. Ahead of them, a massive cylindrical structure loomed, a towering piece of alien technology that seemed to hum with unnatural energy. It was unlike anything Cal had seen before, a fusion of dark metal and shifting organic matter, its surface slick and alive with strange veins of blue light. The weapon. The Zenith's ultimate weapon. "It's worse than we thought," Lyra muttered, her gaze fixed on the device. "This thing is powered by some kind of core, and it's linked to the entire base." Kale nodded grimly. The weapon was far more complex than they had anticipated. It wasn't just a tool of destruction. It was a weapon of annihilation, capable of wiping out entire civilizations in an instant. And it was powered by the very base they were standing in. If they destroyed it, they would risk taking down everything around them. But if they didn't, the Zenith would be able to deploy it and wipe out humanity in a single blow. "We don't have much time," Kale said, his voice tight. "We need to shut it down before it activates." "Can we do it from here?" Marcus's voice crackled through the comms. Kale glanced around the chamber, searching for any signs of a control panel or a way to disable the weapon. The structure was covered in strange markings and symbols, none of which made any sense to him, but he didn't need to understand the alien language. He just needed to destroy it. "We'll find a way," Kale replied. "Everyone, spread out. Cover each other's backs. I'll look for the control panel." His team moved swiftly, covering every corner of the chamber, their weapons raised and ready. But as Kale approached the towering structure, he felt a sudden shift in the air, a crackling energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Something was wrong. Before Kale could react, the ground beneath them shook violently, and a low, guttural roar filled the chamber. The Zenith had anticipated their arrival. The weapon was already activated. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a massive, armored creature, its body encased in thick, black exoskeletons. It was one of the Zenith's commanders, a being of unimaginable power and intelligence, the last line of defense, and it was there to ensure that no one would stop the weapon. "We've been expecting you." The creature's voice reverberated through the chamber, its tone cold and mocking. "You thought you could defeat us. You are nothing but insects to be crushed." Cal's heart raced. The creature was taller than any soldier Cal had ever faced, its armor nearly impervious to conventional weapons. But Cal wasn't one to back down from a challenge. He could feel the weight of humanity's survival pressing on him, and it gave him strength. "I've fought worse than you," Cal growled, his voice steady despite the overwhelming odds. "And we're not backing down now." The creature's laugh was a low rumble, its eyes glowing with malicious intent. It raised its arm, and the weapon behind it hummed louder, the core now fully charged. "You'll never stop the weapon. Earth will fall. Humanity will be erased." Cal's mind raced. The weapon was already activated, but if they could somehow disable the creature, they might still have a chance to destroy the core. But they had no time to waste. If the weapon launched, it would mean the end. In a flash, the creature lunged toward Cal, its massive fist crashing into the ground where he had stood just moments before. Cal barely managed to roll out of the way, the force of the impact sending a shockwave through the chamber. The air grew thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and ozone as Cal's enhanced vision tracked the creature's every move. Lyra and the others opened fire on the creature, but the shots barely left a mark on its armor. It was nearly impervious to their weapons. They needed something more. Cal's mind raced, his focus narrowing to the one thing that could turn the tide. The core. With a roar, Cal surged forward, his body moving faster than the creature could react. He reached the towering structure, grabbing hold of the base and digging his enhanced fingers into the cold metal. The core was close, but the creature was still coming for him, its movements faster than Cal had anticipated. Cal slammed his fist into the core's control panel, sparks flying as the system screamed in protest. The creature roared in fury, but Cal didn't stop. He continued to pound against the interface, his blows sending electrical surges throughout the chamber. Finally, with a deafening crack, the panel sparked and the weapon's hum began to falter. The creature screeched, charging toward him in a final desperate attempt to stop him. But Cal had already done it. The weapon's core overloaded, sending a blinding flash of light throughout the chamber. Cal braced himself as the shockwave sent him flying backward, slamming into the cold metal wall. For a moment, the world went silent. And then, everything fell quiet. The weapon was destroyed. The Zenith's final hope was gone. As Cal slowly stood, bloodied and battered, He looked around at his team. The survivors were safe. The Zenith had been defeated. Humanity had won. Against all odds, they had survived. Cale collapsed to his knees, exhaustion flooding over him. But in the silence that followed, one thing was clear. The eternal hero had lived up to his name.